In the shadowed corridors of demonology, where mortals dare not tread without trembling, one name rises above the sulphurous mists like a warning carved in obsidian: Asmodeus. The very syllables seem to writhe on the tongue, carrying with them centuries of forbidden knowledge, twisted desire, and royal malevolence. He is called the Lord of Lust, the Prince of Demons, the King of 9 hells, commanding 72 legions of lesser devils. This ancient entity has stalked through human consciousness for millennia, shape-shifting across cultures, slithering from Persian fire temples into Jewish mysticism, from medieval grimoires into the fevered imaginations of witch hunters. But who is Asmodeus truly? What dark genesis birthed this demon of desire, and why, after thousands of years, does his legend still grip us with such primal fascination? Tonight, we descend into the abyss to uncover the truth behind one of hell's most infamous monarchs. We'll trace his origins through the flames of ancient Persia, witness his terrible works in the Book of Tobit, and stand beside King Solomon as he dares to chain the unchainable. We'll explore the moment when this demon king stole a throne and wore a human face, and we'll examine how medieval scholars positioned him as one of 7 princes ruling the kingdom of sin itself. This is not simply the story of a demon. This is an exploration of humanity's oldest fears, our most dangerous desires, and the thin boundary between wisdom and destruction. Prepare yourself. The seals are about to break. Long before Asmodeus haunted the nightmares of medieval Christians or tormented the righteous in Jewish scripture, he existed under another name, in another form, in a religion that predated both. In the sacred texts of Zoroastrianism, the ancient faith of Persia, there lurked a demon called Asmodeus. The name itself translates roughly as demon of wrath, or fury personified. This was no minor spirit skulking in shadows. Asmodeus stood among the chief servants of Angra Mainyu, the principle of cosmic evil, darkness incarnate, opposing the good creator, Ahura Mazda. The Zoroastrian texts, particularly the Avesta and later Pahlavi writings, paint Asmodeus in stark, violent imagery. He wielded what the texts called the bloody club, a weapon of pure destructive rage. This demon stirred violence in human hearts, turned brother against brother, and reveled in the chaos of warfare. The Gathic texts, among the oldest Zoroastrian writings, warn that followers of evil walk in Ishma's path. He embodied wrath so pure that later Persian writings positioned him as opposing Srosha, the divine spirit of religious obedience, and Mithra, the god of covenants. Wherever order and righteousness attempted to flourish, Ashma brought drunken violence, discord, and the dissolution of sacred bonds. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. The Jewish people, during their Babylonian exile in the 6th century, before the Common Era, found themselves immersed in Persian culture. This wasn't merely a political captivity. It was a profound cultural collision that would reshape Jewish theology in ways still evident today. Persian concepts seeped into Jewish thought like ink spreading through water. The heightened emphasis on angels and demons, the cosmic battle between good and evil, the very notion of a devil as God's adversary, all these bear the fingerprints of Zoroastrian influence. And somewhere in this cultural exchange, Asmodeus underwent a transformation. The demon of wrath acquired new dimensions, new territories of sin to govern. His name evolved through the linguistic blender of ancient Near Eastern languages. Asmodeus became Asmodeus in Greek, Ashmedai in Hebrew, variations that would echo through countless texts in the centuries to come. Some Jewish scholars attempted their own etymology, connecting the name to the Hebrew word shamad, meaning to destroy or annihilate. Whether this represented genuine linguistic descent or folk etymology, the human tendency to reshape foreign words into familiar patterns, remains debated. What's undeniable is that by the time Asmodeus emerged in Jewish texts, he had become something far more complex than a simple embodiment of rage. This transformation reveals something profound about how religious ideas migrate and mutate. Asmodeus wasn't simply imported wholesale from Persian belief. He was reimagined, his portfolio expanded, his nature reinterpreted through the lens of Jewish theological concerns. The demon of wrath became entangled with lust, with the disruption of marriage, with jealousy and possession. He retained his destructive nature, but acquired a psychological sophistication absent from his Zoroastrian predecessor, where Asmodeus smashed skulls with a bloody club. Asmodeus would come to specialize in the subtler violence of corrupted desire, of marriages destroyed from within, of lust twisted into instrument of torment. What's particularly striking is how this evolution reflects the concerns of a people in exile, grappling with questions of identity, purity, and the preservation of community. In Babylon, far from their homeland, surrounded by foreign customs and the temptation to assimilate, the Jewish community needed frameworks for understanding spiritual threat. Asmodeus, with his focus on disrupting marriages and corrupting domestic sanctity, embodied anxieties about maintaining Jewish identity through proper marriage and family structure. He became not merely a demon of individual sin, but a threat to the very continuity of the Jewish people. This Persian genesis also explains why Asmodeus would later fascinate Christian demonologists. He arrived in Christian consciousness, already carrying centuries of accumulated meaning, already positioned at the intersection of multiple religious traditions. He was ancient before Christianity was born, a demon with a pedigree stretching back to the dualistic fires of Zoroastrian cosmology. Medieval Christian scholars, encountering him through Jewish texts and early Christian apocrypha, inherited a figure of remarkable theological density, a demon whose very name whispered of distant deserts, of Persian fire altars, of exiled prophets dreaming apocalyptic visions beside Babylonian rivers. Our first full portrait of Asmodeus in his Jewish incarnation appears in the Book of Tobit, a text composed sometime between 250 and 150 before the Common Era. Tobit sits in that interesting category of scripture known as Judeo-Canonical, included in Catholic and Orthodox Bibles, but not in the Hebrew Bible or most Protestant versions. This ambiguous canonical status hasn't diminished the book's tremendous influence on how generations understood Asmodeus. If anything, its liminal position made it more intriguing, a text hovering between accepted scripture and forbidden knowledge. The story centers on Sarah, daughter of Raguel, a woman cursed by the most peculiar and terrible affliction. 7 times she had been betrothed. 7 times she approached her wedding night with hope that this time, perhaps, would be different. 7 times that hope died in horror, for Sarah was beloved, or perhaps possessed, by the demon Asmodeus, who would tolerate no rival for her affections. On each wedding night, before the marriage could be consummated, Asmodeus struck. The bridegrooms died, every single one, their lives snuffed out in what should have been moments of joy and union. The text describes Asmodeus as the worst of demons in some translations, though, interestingly, other versions present him with slightly more nuance. Was Asmodeus motivated by love? The text suggests he loved Sarah, though this love manifested as possessive violence rather than any recognizable form of devotion. This raises fascinating psychological questions. Was Asmodeus punishing these men for their lust, as some scholars suggest, given that the righteous Tobias would later be spared by praying to be free from carnal desire? Or was this simply demonic jealousy, a dark mirror of human possessiveness magnified to murderous extremes? The curse devastated Sarah beyond the loss of her husbands. Her maids mocked her. She contemplated suicide, the stigma of 7 dead husbands, whether people blamed her directly or simply feared association with her tragedy, made her an outcast. This detail reveals how the story functioned as more than mere demon tale. It explored the social consequences of supernatural affliction, the way communities isolate those touched by forces beyond normal understanding. Enter Tobias, son of Tobit, traveling to Media on family business, guided by someone he believed to be a helpful human companion, but who was actually the archangel Raphael in disguise. When Tobias learned he was destined to marry Sarah, he naturally feared meeting the same fate as his 7 predecessors. But Raphael revealed the solution, the heart and liver of a fish they had caught during their journey. On the wedding night, Tobias was to place these organs on burning coals. The smoke produced would drive Asmodeus away. This remedy strikes modern readers as bizarre, but it carried specific cultural resonances. Fish organs burned as incense had apotropaic properties in ancient Near Eastern belief, protective magic against evil spirits. The smoke itself becomes significant. Demons in many traditions cannot tolerate certain scents or vapors. More than mere folk magic, though, this represents the triumph of obedience and faith. Tobias followed Raphael's instructions precisely, trusted in divine protection, and approached his wedding night with prayer rather than raw lust. The exorcism succeeded dramatically, as the fish's liver and heart smoldered on the coals, releasing their pungent smoke into the wedding chamber. Asmodeus fled. The text specifies his destination, the uttermost parts of Egypt, that ancient land associated in Jewish thought with exile and slavery. There, Raphael bound him, chaining the demon in a distant desert where he could torment Sarah no more. The binding is crucial. Asmodeus wasn't destroyed but contained, imprisoned, rendered powerless. This established a pattern that would recur throughout Asmodean legends. The demon could be controlled, outwitted, bound, but never truly eliminated. The story resonated through centuries of Jewish and Christian interpretation because it dramatized essential religious themes. It demonstrated the power of angelic intervention against demonic threat. It showed that purity of intention and prayer could triumph over supernatural evil. But it also revealed something darker about Asmodeus specifically: his capacity for obsession, his interference in human intimacy, his role as corrupter of the marriage bed. These would become his defining characteristics, the aspects emphasized when medieval Christian demonologists catalogued the princes of hell. What's often overlooked is how the Book of Tobit portrays Asmodeus with almost tragic dimensions. His love for Sarah, however twisted, suggests emotional capacity beyond mere malice. He's not simply destroying random people for pleasure. He's eliminating specific rivals for a woman's affection. This psychological complexity sets Asmodeus apart from demons presented as pure embodiments of chaos or destruction. He has desires, however warped. He forms attachments, however deadly. In this, he serves as distorted mirror of humanity itself. Our capacity for love corrupted into possession, our desire transformed into weapon. If the Book of Tobit introduced Asmodeus as threat to marital sanctity, the Talmudic legends surrounding King Solomon and the construction of the First Temple revealed him as something more: a being of immense power and knowledge, dangerous yet potentially useful, a demon king ruling his own subjects in a dark parody of Solomon's earthly reign. The story, found primarily in Tractate Gittin 68a to b of the Babylonian Talmud, and elaborated in various midrashic sources, has captivated Jewish imagination for centuries. The problem began with a divine commandment. When building God's temple, Solomon could use no iron tools. The biblical text from 1 Kings specifies that the stones arrived at the building site already perfectly dressed, and there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house while it was being built. This presented an engineering impossibility. How could massive blocks of stone be precisely cut and shaped without iron implements? Solomon's wise men had an answer: the shamir. The shamir defies easy categorization. Descriptions vary between a miraculous worm, a stone, or perhaps a herb. What all accounts agree on is its power. The shamir could split the hardest rock with supernatural precision. Moses himself had allegedly used it to engrave the names of the 12 tribes onto the precious stones of the high priest's ephod. But, by Solomon's time, the shamir's location had been lost to legend. When Solomon consulted demons about the shamir's whereabouts, they directed him to the one being who would know: Asmodeus, their king. Asmodeus lived on a distant mountain where he had carved a cistern for his drinking water. Every day, following a precise ritual, he would seal this cistern with a massive stone, pressing his signet into the seal before ascending to heaven. There, the Talmud tells us, Asmodeus would study in the synagogue of heaven, then descend to earth to study in the synagogue of earth, before returning to his mountain to drink. This detail is remarkable. A demon who studies Torah, who participates in heavenly and earthly academies of learning. Already, we see Ashmedai portrayed not as purely malevolent entity, but as scholar. As ruler with his own court and customs, Solomon dispatched his champion Benaiah son of Jehoiada to capture the demon king. Benaiah brought specific tools: chains inscribed with God's ineffable name, a ring similarly engraved, skins of wine, and wool. The plan was ingenious. Benaiah drained Ashmedai's cistern from below through a carefully bored hole, plugging it with wool. Then he filled the cistern with wine from above and concealed himself in a nearby tree to wait. When Ashmedai returned from his daily studies and found wine instead of water, he initially resisted. The Talmud records him quoting scripture, citing verses from Proverbs warning against strong drink. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whoever is deceived thereby shall not be wise. A demon quoting biblical wisdom against temptation. The irony is almost comic. But thirst eventually overwhelmed caution. Ashmedai drank the wine, became intoxicated, and fell into deep sleep. Benaiah descended from his hiding place and wrapped the sacred chains around the demon's neck. Ashmedai awoke to captivity. He struggled violently, but Benaiah invoked God's name, inscribed on both chain and ring. The demon submitted. "The name of your Lord is upon you," Benaiah warned, and Ashmedai recognized the authority of the divine names that bound him. This moment establishes crucial theological principle. Even the most powerful demons must bow before God's explicit power. The chains work not through material strength, but through sacred authority. The journey back to Jerusalem demonstrated Ashmedai's nature through revealing incidents. He wept upon seeing a blind man lost and a drunkard stumbling, actions suggesting capacity for compassion. He laughed at a man measuring his feet for shoes, at a magician performing tricks, at a wedding celebration. When Solomon later asked him to explain these reactions, Ashmedai revealed hidden knowledge. The blind man walked over buried treasure while remaining ignorant of his proximity to wealth. The drunkard had only 7 years to live, yet wasted time in stupor. The man buying shoes would not live long enough to wear them out. The magician sought hidden treasures while standing directly above them. The bride and groom's joy was hollow because the groom would die within 30 days. These revelations showcased Ashmedai's prophetic knowledge, his ability to perceive hidden truths and see through time's veil. Upon reaching Jerusalem, Solomon didn't immediately summon the demon. Instead, Ashmedai waited 3 days outside the royal presence. Each day, he sent messages through servants using brick symbolism. First, he stacked bricks. Solomon interpreted this as, "Give the king more to drink." Next day, he removed bricks, reduce his intake. The third day, Ashmedai entered Solomon's presence, took a reed, measured 4 cubits, and threw it before the king with a grim prophecy. When Solomon died, he would possess only 4 cubits of earth, a grave. This established dynamic between them. Ashmedai superior in certain knowledge, willing to instruct Solomon in the realities beneath appearances. Ashmedai revealed the Shemir's location, not in his own possession, but held by Rahab, the angelic prince of the sea, who entrusted it only to the wild rooster, the hoopoe. Bound by sacred oath, Solomon orchestrated an elaborate capture involving the hoopoe's nest, ultimately securing the Shemir. With this tool, the temple's construction proceeded without iron's forbidden touch. But Ashmedai remained, bound in chains, laboring on the temple. The texts describe him treading clay with his feet, drawing water, tasks that seem almost humiliatingly mundane for a demon king. Yet, Solomon kept him imprisoned not merely for labor, but for his knowledge. That fierce demon Asmodeus knew even the future, one text explains, making him too valuable to release despite the danger. The uneasy arrangement between Solomon and Ashmedai could not last indefinitely. Pride, curiosity, and hubris, Solomon's tragic flaws that would later contribute to his downfall, created the opening for Ashmedai's revenge. The Talmud and later Midrashic elaborations tell what happened next with devastating economy. One day, when the temple's construction neared completion, Solomon found himself alone with the captive demon. Emboldened by their conversations, by the apparent control he exercised over this mighty being, Solomon asked a question that would cost him everything. What is your superiority over mankind? You demons are bound by God's name, enslaved by humans bearing the proper knowledge. Wherein lies your vaunted power? Asmodeus responded with careful calculation. Remove these chains from me. Give me your ring. Then I will show you true demonic power. The request should have raised alarm. Why would any captor grant such demands? But Solomon, confident in his wisdom and perhaps curious beyond caution, agreed. He removed the chains inscribed with God's name. He handed over his royal signet ring, the very symbol of his authority. In that instant, everything changed. Asmodeus swallowed the ring. In some versions, he threw it into the sea. In others, it remained in his stomach. Inaccessible and therefore useless to Solomon, the demon spread his wings, placing one against the earth and one reaching toward heaven. Then, with terrible force, he hurled Solomon 400 parasangs, roughly 1,500 miles, away from Jerusalem. Some traditions specify he threw Solomon to the coast of Palestine. Others say to distant lands where no one knew Israel's king. More than mere exile, Asmodeus perpetrated identity theft on cosmic scale. The demon assumed Solomon's exact appearance, his mannerisms, his voice. He seated himself on Solomon's throne and began ruling Israel. For a time, no one suspected. The demon king gave judgments, issued decrees, lived in Solomon's palace. But Asmodeus couldn't perfectly maintain the disguise. Certain behaviors betrayed his true nature. His court observed disturbing anomalies. The king they had known as paragons of wisdom and piety now violated Jewish law with seeming carelessness. He approached women during their menstrual periods, times when Jewish law mandated strict separation. Even more shockingly, he attempted relations with Bathsheba, Solomon's own mother. The demon couldn't quite grasp or didn't care about the taboos governing human kingship. Another detail exposed him. The demon always wore slippers or shoes, never going barefoot, even in private chambers where the real Solomon would have removed them. His servants whispered about this peculiarity, because demons, according to widespread folk belief, possess the feet of roosters or other animals. Asmodeus' constant covering of his feet suggested he hid something beneath the leather. Meanwhile, the real Solomon wandered in exile, a king without kingdom, a wise man whom no one would believe. He traveled from town to town, crying out, I am Solomon, I am Ecclesiastes, son of David, who was king in Jerusalem. People thought him mad. How could this ragged wanderer be the glorious Solomon? They mocked him, drove him away. Some versions specify he survived by working as a cook in various households, living on whatever scraps and wages he could earn. The contrast is almost unbearably poignant. The wisest man in the world, builder of God's temple, reduced to menial labor while an impostor ruled in his place. This continued for 3 years. 3 years of the demon on the throne, 3 years of Solomon in the wilderness. The number carries theological weight in Jewish tradition, a period of testing and transformation. Finally, the anomalies in the false Solomon's behavior became too egregious to ignore. The wise men of Israel, particularly those closest to the king, began to suspect. They approached Benaiah, Solomon's most trusted warrior, who admitted he had not been granted audience with the king since before Solomon's change in behavior. An investigation commenced. They questioned the palace women about the king's conduct. They noted his refusal to remove his shoes. Gradually, consensus formed. The being on the throne was not Solomon. When they confronted him with their suspicions, when they produced the sacred chains and rings again inscribed with God's name, Asmodeus fled. He vanished as suddenly as he had appeared, returning to whatever dimension demons inhabit when not tormenting humanity. Summoned at last, the real Solomon returned to Jerusalem. The texts don't elaborate on the emotional reunion, the explanations required, the process of re-establishing his authority. They focus instead on Solomon's reaction to his ordeal. Fear. Despite being restored to his throne, despite Asmodeus' flight, Solomon never felt secure again. For the rest of his days, he slept surrounded by armed guards, protected by warriors who stood watch through every night. The trauma of having his identity stolen, his place usurped, never left him. This legend accomplishes several theological purposes. It explains the strange third-person references in Ecclesiastes, where Solomon seems to speak of himself as another person or as if viewing his life from outside. It provides narrative explanation for Solomon's later descent into idolatry and violation of Torah commandments. Perhaps these were actually Asmodeus' acts during the impersonation, but, more profoundly, it serves as meditation on the nature of identity, authority, and the consequences of hubris. Solomon's greatest wisdom brought him to a height where he believed he could fully control forces beyond human mastery. His fall from that height was catastrophic, precisely because the height was so great. The story also reveals something crucial about Asmodeus' character: his capacity for perfect imitation. This wasn't crude possession or obvious replacement. The demons studied Solomon well enough to replicate him, almost flawlessly. Only subtle violations of law and custom betrayed him, suggesting Asmodeus understood human nature, but couldn't quite suppress his demonic nature entirely. He is sophisticated mimic, patient schemer, a being intelligent enough to wear another's face for years. By the 16th century, Christian Europe writhed in the grip of witch-hunting mania. Thousands would die accused of trafficking with demons, of pledging themselves to Satan, of working maleficia that destroyed crops and killed children. Into this atmosphere of fear and zealous orthodoxy stepped Peter Binsfeld, auxiliary bishop of Trier, in the German region that would become Rhineland-Palatinate. Binsfeld participated eagerly in the witch trials ravaging his diocese between 1581 and 1593. He wrote influential treatises arguing that confessions extracted under torture should be believed, that even young children could be guilty of witchcraft, though he did consider boys under 14 and girls under 12 generally incapable of such sin, a position considered moderate in that horrific context. But Binsfeld's lasting legacy extends beyond his role in judicial murder. In 1589, he published a work that would permanently influence how Christians understood demonic hierarchy: his classification of demons according to the 7 deadly sins. This wasn't entirely original. A 15th-century English text called The Lantern of Light had proposed similar categorization, but Binsfeld's version achieved greater circulation and authority, crystallizing into what's often simply called Binsfeld's classification. The system matched 7 archdemons to 7 cardinal sins, creating infernal counterparts to the 7 virtues. Lucifer embodied pride, the sin that had caused his own fall from heaven. Mammon represented greed and the worship of wealth. Leviathan, the great sea serpent of biblical imagery, tempted humans toward envy. Beelzebub, lord of the flies, ruled gluttony. Satan himself personified wrath. Belphegor encouraged sloth and spiritual torpor. And Asmodeus, he was appointed prince of lust, demon who corrupted human sexuality and twisted desire into damnation. This classification positioned Asmodeus among hell's elite, not merely a demon, but one of 7 princes ruling under Lucifer's ultimate authority. Binsfeld drew on centuries of earlier Christian demonology, including the Malleus Maleficarum, that infamous witch-hunting manual published in 1486 by Heinrich Kramer. The Malleus had already identified Asmodeus as the demon of fornication, the chief of that abomination for which God had destroyed Sodom. By Binsfeld's time, this association was well established. His innovation lay in formalizing the system, in creating clean organizational chart of hell's administration. Under Asmodeus's command marched 72 legions of demons, the number itself significant, perhaps echoing the 72 nations of the world in Jewish tradition, or the 72 names of God in Kabbalistic thought. These legions worked their corrupting influence wherever humans gathered, particularly in contexts involving sexual temptation. Later, demonologists specified additional details. Sebastian Michaelis, writing in 1612, claimed that Asmodeus specifically tempted humans toward wantonness, and that his adversary, the saint whose virtue could thwart him, was Saint John. 16th-century writers assigned Asmodeus to November, the month when his power supposedly peaked, though others associated him with Aquarius, specifically the period between January 30th and February 8th. Asmodeus's portfolio in Christian demonology expanded beyond simple lust. Johann Weyer, the Dutch physician and demonologist writing in the mid-16th century, described Asmodeus as hell's banker, presiding over baccarat tables in the infernal casino and overseeing all earthly gambling houses. This association connects to the demon's role in encouraging obsession and addiction, gambling as another form of desire corrupting judgment and destroying families. Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire infernal, published in 1818 and featuring an official portrait of Asmodeus approved by the Archbishop of Paris, describes the demon as Prince of Revenge, expanding his domain further into the territory of wounded pride and vindictive violence. These systematic classifications served practical purposes for the demonologists and their readers. In an age when educated Christians genuinely believed in constant spiritual warfare, when exorcisms were regular occurrences, and when identifying specific demons was considered crucial to effective resistance, these organizational schemes provided what seemed like actionable intelligence. If you could name the demon, identify its particular sin specialization, and invoke its opposing saint, you had tools to combat spiritual attack. The classifications also revealed Christian anxieties about the body and desire. That Asmodeus, among all possible demons, received such prominent position as one of 7 princes suggests how deeply sexual sin preoccupied Christian thinkers. Lust wasn't merely one sin among others. It warranted its own demonic prince, its own infernal bureaucracy. The focus on Asmodeus reflected broader cultural currents. The Catholic Church's emphasis on celibacy and sexual purity, Protestant anxieties about Catholic corruption, and universal concerns about family disruption and social disorder stemming from sexual transgression. What's fascinating is how these Christian classifications drew on but diverged from earlier Jewish conceptualizations of Asmodai. The Talmudic Asmodai was complex, a scholar, a being who could weep at human suffering, someone who studied Torah and hoped for a place in the world to come. The Christian Asmodeus became flattened into pure personification of one sin, his other characteristics subordinated to his role as tempter toward lust. This simplification served Christian theological needs, but lost some of the depth that made the original Jewish legends so compelling. What does Asmodeus look like? How would you recognize him if he appeared? The descriptions vary wildly across texts and traditions, reflecting the demon's shape-shifting nature and the different cultural anxieties he embodied. The most elaborate and frequently cited description comes from Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire infernal, that 19th-century compendium that attempted to catalog hell's entire population with encyclopedic thoroughness. In this famous depiction, approved by church authorities, Asmodeus appears as a composite nightmare. He has the torso of a human man, but his legs terminate in rooster's feet, those infamous demonic extremities that Asmodai supposedly hid beneath his slippers during his impersonation of Solomon. From behind, a serpent's tail writhes and coils, embodying the demonic connection to the serpent in Eden, that original tempter who corrupted human innocence. Most striking are his 3 heads: one human head that spits fire, one ram's head, and one bull's head. He rides a lion equipped with dragon's wings and neck, a chimeric mount that combines predatory terrestrial power with mythical airborne menace. Every element of this description carries symbolic weight. The rooster's feet connect to vigilance and lust. Roosters crow at dawn and aggressively pursue mating. The serpent's tail invokes Eden's temptation, wisdom corrupted into deception. The fire-breathing human head represents consuming passion, desire that burns away reason. The ram's head suggests stubbornness and leadership. Rams lead flocks and fight for dominance. The bull's head evokes raw fertility, sexual power, and earthly strength. The lion mount reinforces royalty and predatory nature, while the dragon elements add supernatural menace. Earlier medieval grimoires like the Ars Goetia, part of the Lesser Key of Solomon, present somewhat different imagery. There, Asmodeus appears with 3 heads, bull, man, and ram, and rides upon a dragon. He breathes fire and carries a lance with a banner, emphasizing his role as military commander of Hell's legions. This more martial presentation aligns with Asmodeus's position as king and general, emphasizing his authority and power, rather than focusing solely on sexual symbolism. Some traditions describe Asmodeus as handsome and engaging, noting that he possesses good manners and charming nature, the better to seduce and deceive. The Spanish novel El Diablo Cojuelo by Luis Vélez de Guevara, published in 1641, presents Asmodeus as the limping devil, a mischievous but somewhat sympathetic figure who entertains the protagonist by revealing Madrid's secrets. This limping detail appears across multiple sources and may relate to a legend that Asmodeus fell from heaven while fighting another devil, injuring himself in the descent. It may also connect to his rooster feet. Walking on such limbs would produce an uneven gait. His powers, as enumerated across various grimoires and demonological texts, go far beyond simple temptation toward lust. The Lesser Key of Solomon credits him with knowledge of hidden treasures and the ability to reveal where they're buried. He can grant invisibility to his summoners, making them undetectable to others, a power that naturally lends itself to secret sins. He teaches arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and various handicrafts, positioning him as educator as well as corrupter. This teaching aspect echoes the Talmudic traditions emphasizing Asmodeus' scholarly pursuits, his studying in heavenly and earthly academies. Asmodeus answers questions about the future truthfully, a dangerous gift, since foreknowledge can drive humans to desperate actions or paralyze them with dread. He incites not only lust, but also gambling addiction, encouraging humans toward behaviors that destroy families and fortunes. The connection between lust and gambling makes psychological sense. Both involve surrendering to irrational desire. Both promise intense gratification. Both frequently end in ruin. Medieval texts warn that Asmodeus can possess humans, particularly in groups, using his charisma and power to influence multiple victims simultaneously. His ability to inspire awe makes people susceptible to his suggestions. He can estrange newlyweds, causing them to turn against each other. He wastes away virgins' beauty and transports married men into fits of madness where they abandon their families to pursue other men's wives. These specific abilities, detailed in the Testament of Solomon and elaborated in later grimoires, reveal fascination with how desire destroys social bonds and family structures. Summoning Asmodeus, according to the grimoires, requires elaborate ritual precautions. The magician must cast protective circles, invoke divine names, use specific times when the demon's power waxes or wanes. Some texts warn that Asmodeus appears slowly, refusing to be rushed, testing the summoner's patience and resolve. Others caution that he lies when first summoned, offering false information until properly bound by sacred names and symbols. This emphasis on his deceptive nature reinforces his role as subtle corrupter rather than obvious destroyer. The most obscure detail about Asmodeus, rarely discussed in popular treatments, but preserved in specialized grimoires, concerns his weakness. The smell of fish liver and heart when burned produces smoke he cannot endure. This callback to the Book of Tobit persists across centuries of demonological writing, suggesting that original traditions retain power even as new elaborations accumulate. Fish smoke becomes the consistent vulnerability in otherwise invincible demon, a reminder that Jewish folklore provided the foundation on which Christian demonologists built their more systematic structures. Strip away the supernatural elements, the dragon mounts, the three heads, the legions of subordinate demons. And what remains? At its core, the Asmodeus legend functions as exploration of desire's destructive capacity. Lust, in this context, means more than simple sexual appetite. It represents any consuming want that overrides reason, morality, and social bonds. Asmodeus embodies the moment when desire stops being natural impulse and becomes obsession that destroys. Consider the pattern across his various legends. In Tobit, he murders 7 men, not because he hates them particularly, but because they stand between him and what he wants. His desire for Sarah transforms from emotion into imperative that justifies any violence. In the Solomon legends, his eventual revenge stems from wounded pride and desire for freedom, but manifests as calculated deception that nearly destroys Israel's greatest king. The demon doesn't simply attack Solomon directly. He steals his identity, corrupts his reputation, potentially ruins his people's faith in him. The revenge is surgical, psychological, devastating in ways that physical violence could never match. This sophistication matters. Asmodeus represents temptation that thinks, that plans, that adapts to circumstances. He's not mere embodiment of sexual appetite. He's intelligence turned toward corruption. Knowledge used to identify and exploit vulnerability. When he teaches mathematics and astronomy, when he reveals hidden treasures, when he prophesies the future, he demonstrates that destruction can come through gifts as easily as through obvious assault. The knowledge he offers isn't false. By all accounts, he tells truth. But truth at wrong time, offered with wrong intention, damages as surely as any lie. The marriage disruption theme that runs through Asmodeus legends reveals cultural anxieties about social stability. Marriage, in the ancient and medieval worlds where these stories developed, wasn't primarily about individual fulfillment. It was the fundamental building block of social order, the mechanism through which property transferred, alliances formed, and communities perpetuated themselves. A demon who specializes in destroying marriages threatens civilization itself. This partly explains why Christian demonologists granted him such prominent position. Lust undermines the family, and family's collapse means society's collapse. But there's deeper layer here. Asmodeus legends often involve deception about identity. He wears Solomon's face. He appears handsome and charming. He teaches useful knowledge. The message is clear. Destructive desire doesn't announce itself obviously. It comes disguised as something else. As love, as wisdom, as justified revenge. The demon adapts his approach to his target's weakness. This makes him far more dangerous than demons who simply rage and destroy. Those can be identified and resisted. Asmodeus offers what you want. Makes you complicit in your own corruption. His status as scholar, his studying in heavenly and earthly academies in the Talmudic tradition, adds another dimension. Knowledge doesn't guarantee virtue. Intelligence can serve evil as readily as good. The demon scholar represents the terror of the educated villain, the one who understands morality well enough to subvert it deliberately. This resonates with perennial fears about intellectuals, about the learned who seem to know too much, who cross boundaries that should remain sacred. The recurring motif of Asmodeus weeping at human suffering, while simultaneously causing it, suggests theological wrestling with the problem of evil. Can demons feel compassion? If they can, does that make them more or less monstrous? The texts don't fully resolve this tension. They present Asmodeus as complex, capable of tears, yet willing to murder. Bound by sacred names, yet constantly seeking freedom to work harm, admiring of virtue in others, yet corrupting it when possible. This complexity makes him psychologically realistic in ways that pure embodiments of evil could never be. Finally, the fish smoke weakness matters philosophically. Even the most powerful demon has vulnerability. Evil isn't invincible, but the protection requires knowledge, obedience, and willingness to use what seems absurd. Who would think burning fish organs could drive away hell's prince? The remedy appears ridiculous until it works. Faith means trusting the absurd remedy, following the divine instruction even when reason laughs. This theme recurs throughout religious literature. God's ways appear foolish to human wisdom, yet they work when human wisdom fails. Asmodeus, ultimately, functions as mirror reflecting humanity's shadow side. He embodies the desire we pretend we don't have, the revenge fantasies we suppress, the moment when love becomes possession, when ambition becomes ruthlessness. He is what happens when we stop restraining our wants, when we decide that getting what we desire justifies any cost. The legends warn that this demon doesn't merely tempt from outside, he reveals what's already within, waiting for opportunity to emerge. The reign of Asmodeus, Lord of Lust and Prince of Demons, spans millennia and crosses cultures. From Persian fire altars to Babylonian exile, from Jewish scripture to Christian grimoires, from Talmudic legends to medieval witch-hunting manuals, this demon has persisted as potent symbol of desire's dangerous depths. He reminds us that evil rarely announces itself honestly, that corruption comes disguised as gift, that our greatest vulnerabilities often hide in what we most want. The next time you hear Asmodeus's name whispered in story or invoked in grimoire, remember that you're hearing echo of ancient fears and eternal warnings. Remember Sarah's 7 dead husbands. Remember Solomon in exile, his throne stolen by the being he thought he controlled. Remember the fish smoke rising in a wedding chamber, driving back the demon who thought himself invincible. Remember that even princes of hell have limits, that sacred names have power, that knowledge and desire without virtue lead only to ruin. If you found this journey into the abyss enlightening, hit that like button and subscribe to History Scrolls for more deep explorations of mythology, legend, and the darker corners of religious tradition. Share this video with anyone fascinated by demonology or curious about where our ideas about evil come from. Leave a comment telling me which demon or mythological figure you'd like us to investigate next. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember that sometimes the old stories carry wisdom our modern world has forgotten. The seals are closing, the descent is complete, but Asmodeus, patient as ever, waits for the next opportunity to whisper in willing ears.